I'll never forget the morning Jessica Rivera walked into my courtroom wearing a Chanel coat and carrying a Louis Vuitton bag that probably cost more than most people in that room made in a month. She had that look, the kind that says, the rules don't really apply to me. What she didn't know was that I'd already read the police report 3 times before she arrived, and something about it had bothered me from the very first line. The charge seemed simple enough, reckless endangerment and assault, but the victim's name kept pulling me back. Harold Thompson, age 69, Vietnam veteran. I had a feeling this was going to be one of those days that reminds you exactly why you became a judge in the first place. If you've been following these stories, you know I don't take cases like this lightly, and I hope you'll subscribe and stick around because what happened next absolutely shocked me. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their power like this? Let's get into it. It was November 14th, 2023, a Tuesday morning, and my courtroom was unusually quiet when the bailiff called her case. I looked down at the docket and saw the details. Jessica Rivera, age 34, married to Fire Chief Marcus Rivera of Station 12. The charge read reckless endangerment and third-degree assault stemming from an incident on November 3rd at 11:22 p.m. in the parking lot of Mercy General Hospital. The arresting officer was Officer Daniel Kwan, badge number 4721, and he'd written in his report that the victim had been transported to the emergency room with a possible concussion and lacerations to his left temple. I looked up as Jessica walked to the defendant's table, and I noticed everything about her screamed privilege. The designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, the diamond tennis bracelet, the way she didn't even glance at the victim sitting quietly in the back row. That's when I saw Harold for the first time. He was a thin man with gray hair, wearing a brown work jacket that had seen better days, and he sat with his hands folded.
Buckle up, guys. Today we are going to witness what happens when privilege collides with accountability. The morning Jessica Rivera walked into court draped in designer labels, the room shifted. Across from her sat 69-year-old Vietnam veteran Harold Thompson. The charges seemed straightforward, but the tension was anything but. From the first glance, it was clear this case was about more than a parking dispute. It was about power.
In his lap like he didn't want to take up too much space. I made a mental note right then. This man deserves my full attention. I called the court to order and asked Officer Kwan to approach the bench and give me his account of what happened that night. He told me he'd responded to a 911 call from the hospital security office at 11:26 p.m., just 4 minutes after the incident. When he arrived, he found Harold sitting on the curb outside the emergency entrance with blood running down the side of his face and a hospital security guard applying pressure to the wound with gauze. Officer Kwan said Harold had been calm, almost apologetic, and had tried to tell him it was just an accident. But the security guard, a woman named Linda Parsons, who'd worked at that hospital for 16 years, told the officer that she'd watched the whole thing unfold on the surveillance cameras. She said it was no accident. Officer Kwan told me that when he reviewed the footage himself, he saw Jessica Rivera's black Range Rover pull into the emergency drop-off zone, which was clearly marked as no parking. Harold, who worked as a part-time security guard at the hospital to supplement his...
Officer Daniel Kwan stepped forward and laid out the timeline. Surveillance showed Jessica's black Range Rover parked illegally in the emergency zone. Harold approached calmly, hands raised, simply asking her to move. What followed wasn't confusion, it was confrontation. Without audio, the footage still told the story. A door flung open with force, striking Harold and sending him to the pavement.
Veterans Benefits had approached her vehicle and politely asked her to move to the visitor lot about 50 yards away. Officer Kwan said the footage showed Jessica rolling down her window, and even without audio, he could see she was yelling. Harold stepped back with his hands up in a non-threatening gesture, and that's when Jessica threw open her car door with such force that it struck Harold in the head and knocked him to the ground. I stopped Officer Kwan right there and asked him, did she get out to check on him? He shook his head and said, no, Your Honor. She stepped out, looked down at him, got back in her vehicle, and parked it right there in that same spot. She walked into the hospital and left him bleeding on the pavement. I felt my jaw tighten. I asked him what happened next, and he told me that Jessica had been inside visiting her mother, who'd had a minor procedure earlier that day and was already cleared to go home. Hospital staff had called her back outside when they realized what had happened, and that's when Officer Kwan spoke with her. He said she told...
The officer's account grew darker. After the impact, Jessica stepped out, looked down at the injured man, then walked into the hospital, leaving him bleeding on the curb for 45 seconds. Harold later described the moment with quiet restraint. He hadn't wanted trouble, just compliance with rules meant to protect ambulance access. But the encounter escalated the instant status was invoked.
I told him he shouldn't have been standing so close to my car. I didn't see him, it was dark. But Officer Kwan said the footage clearly showed Harold standing at least 6 feet away when she opened the door. He said it was obvious she'd done it on purpose. I looked over at Jessica and she was checking her phone. She wasn't even pretending to pay attention. I said, "Ms. Rivera, please put that away." And she sighed like I'd just asked her to climb a mountain. I asked Harold to stand and tell me in his own words what happened that night. He stood slowly, like his joints hurt, and he cleared his throat. He said, "Your Honor, I was just doing my job. That drop-off zone is for emergencies only, and we have to keep it clear for ambulances." I walked up to her window, I tapped on the glass, and I said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you'll need to move your vehicle to the visitor lot." She rolled down the window and started yelling at me. She said, "Do you know who I am? My husband is the fire chief. I can park wherever I want." I told her respectfully that it didn't matter who her husband was. The rules apply to everyone. That's when she opened the door and hit me. His voice cracked just a little, and I could see he was embarrassed.
Harold testified that Jessica had snapped, declaring her husband was Fire Chief Marcus Rivera and that she could park wherever she pleased. When questioned, she minimized the incident as accidental, suggesting exaggeration. Yet inconsistencies surfaced quickly. She claimed not to have seen him fall, though video suggested otherwise. The courtroom began to sense a widening gap between truth and denial.
Said, "I've been hit worse in Vietnam, Judge. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but the hospital staff insisted I get checked out, and they called the police." I asked him how he was feeling now, and he told me the headaches had lasted about a week, but he was okay. Then he said something that stuck with me. He said, "I just don't want her to do this to someone else." I looked at Jessica and asked her if she had anything to say. She stood up, and I could tell she was annoyed. She said, "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. I didn't assault anyone. My car door accidentally bumped him. He's making this into something it's not because he wants money or attention or something. My husband is a respected fire chief. I volunteer at my children's school. I don't go around hitting senior citizens in parking lots." I asked her, "Did you check on him after he fell?" She hesitated.
The surveillance footage was played in full. Grainy black and white captured the decisive moment. The door striking Harold, his body crumpling, Jessica stepping over him. When confronted, she insisted she didn't realize he was hurt. The lack of urgency, the absence of concern, those details weighed heavily. The narrative of accident was unraveling under visual proof.
Then said, "I didn't realize he'd fallen. I thought he just stepped back." I asked her, "But you did see him on the ground when you got out of your car, correct?" She shifted her weight and said, "I might have seen him sitting down. I don't remember exactly. I was worried about my mother." I looked at Officer Kwan and asked, "How long was the victim on the ground before hospital staff reached him?" He checked his notes and said, "Approximately 45 seconds, Your Honor." Ms. Rivera walked past him and entered the building. I let that sit in the air for a moment. 45 seconds. That's a long time to ignore a man bleeding on the pavement. That's when I decided to bring up the surveillance footage. I asked Officer Kwan.
Harold then revealed what truly lingered. He worked nights to afford his daughter's asthma medication. He didn't seek money. He wanted accountability. When asked if she understood the impact, Jessica rolled her eyes. The emotional imbalance in the room was stark. A veteran clinging to dignity versus a defendant dismissing consequence.
If he had it available, and he said he did. He pulled out a tablet and set it on the bench so I could see. I watched the whole thing play out in grainy black and white video, and it was exactly as he'd described. Harold approached calmly, Jessica yelled, and then the door flew open and struck him square in the side of the head. He went down hard, his body crumpling onto the asphalt. Jessica got out, stood there for a moment looking down at him, then stepped over him and walked inside. I felt my blood pressure rising. I looked at Jessica and said, "You stood there and looked at him, and then you walked away." She said, "I didn't know he was hurt." I said, "You saw a 69-year-old man on the ground, and you didn't think to ask if he was okay?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me with this cold expression, and I realized something right then. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. I asked Harold if there was anything else he wanted me to know, and he said, "Judge."
Officer Kwan introduced a new element: social media posts made after the arrest. 3 posts targeted Harold directly. One mocked entitled old men, another ridiculed veterans, and the third included a blurry photo of him with threats of legal destruction. The digital trail transformed the case from a single incident into a campaign of humiliation.
I need this job. My daughter has asthma, and her medication costs $300 a month even with insurance. My veterans' benefits don't cover everything. I work at that hospital 3 nights a week, and I can't afford to lose it because someone wants to make me look like a liar. I could hear the desperation in his voice, and it broke my heart. Here was a man who'd served his country, who was still working at 69 years old, just to help his daughter, and he was being treated like he didn't matter. I looked at Jessica and asked her, "Do you understand what this man is telling you? Do you understand the impact your actions had on his life?" She rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at me. She said, "Your Honor, with all due respect, I think this is being blown out of proportion." Do you think she's showing remorse yet? I'll dare you to guess what she said next. Drop your prediction in the comments because I promise you won't see this coming. I was about to respond when Officer Kwan interrupted and said, "Your Honor, there's one more thing." He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to bring it up, but knew he...
Jessica defended the posts as free expression, citing her 50,000 followers and labeling herself an influencer. But influence cuts both ways. Harold admitted the posts reached his daughter through friends, sparking whispers at work. The online ridicule had amplified the damage, reshaping public perception and deepening personal shame, far beyond the physical injury.
He had to. I told him to go ahead. He said, "After we arrested Ms. Rivera, we discovered some posts on her social media account. We believe they're relevant to this case." I asked him what kind of posts, and he pulled out his phone and handed it to me. What I saw made my stomach turn. There were 3 posts from the week after the incident, and every single one of them was about Harold. The first one was a photo of the hospital parking lot with a caption that read, "When entitled, old men think they can tell me where to park. Know your place." The second one was even worse. It was a meme making fun of veterans with a caption that said, "Just because you serve doesn't mean you're special. Get over yourself." The third post was a direct attack. It was a blurry photo of Harold, clearly taken from her car window, with the caption, "This loser tried to make me move my car and then played victim when he got bumped. Pathetic. My lawyer will destroy him." I looked up at Jessica, and I could feel the anger rising in my chest. I asked her, "Did you post these?" She shrugged and said, "It's a free country, Your Honor."
Further investigation revealed a pattern. For prior complaints over 18 months, harassment at her child's school, disputes with neighbors, a teenage cashier reduced to quitting, rumors spread at a gym. None had led to charges, but together they painted consistency. When confronted, Jessica dismissed them as jealousy. The claim rang hollow against mounting testimony.
I'm allowed to share my thoughts on my own page. I asked her how many followers she had, and she said, "About 50,000. I'm an influencer." I asked her, "So you used your platform to mock and intimidate the victim of your assault?" She said, "I didn't assault anyone, and I wasn't intimidating him. I was just venting." I looked at Harold, and I could see the shame on his face. He was staring at the floor, and I knew in that moment that those posts had done more damage to him than the physical injury ever could. I asked him, "Did you see these posts?" He nodded and said, "My daughter showed them to me. Some of her friends sent them to her. It's been hard." I asked him how it had been hard, and he said, "People at the hospital have been looking at me differently. One of the nurses asked me if I was the guy who was trying to get money from the fire chief's wife. I'm not trying to get money, Judge. I just want her to take responsibility." I looked at Jessica and said, "You have 50,000 people following you, and you used that influence to publicly humiliate a man who was doing his job and who you physically injured. Do you understand how serious that is?" she said.
The most serious allegation surfaced next. Upon arrest, Jessica allegedly threatened Officer Kwan, claiming her husband would end his career and that the judge would dismiss the case. She later called it emotional talk, but the implication was clear. Status had been weaponized. A recess was called as the gravity shifted from misconduct to obstruction.
"Your Honor, it's just social media. It's not that deep." I could feel my hands gripping the gavel tighter than usual. I said, "It's not that deep? You posted his photo without his consent. You mocked his military service. You called him a liar to 50,000 people, and you did all of this while facing criminal charges for assaulting him. Does that sound like someone who's sorry?" She didn't answer. She just looked at her lawyer, who was sitting there with his head in his hands like he wanted to disappear. I asked the lawyer, "Did you advise your client to post these?" He said, "Absolutely not, Your Honor. I had no knowledge of them until today." I believed him. Jessica had done this on her own, and she'd done it because she thought she was untouchable. I decided right then that I needed to dig deeper. I asked Officer.
When court resumed, Jessica attempted subtle pressure, urging consideration of her family's community contributions and hinting at judicial bias. The implication, that sympathy might cloud fairness, crossed a line. The tension peaked as the authority of the courtroom itself was challenged under the guise of polite suggestion.
Kwan if he'd investigated any other complaints against Jessica Rivera, and he said, "We did, Your Honor, after this incident came to light." He told me that in the past 18 months, there had been 4 separate complaints filed against her for harassment and threatening behavior. One was from a teacher at her children's school who said Jessica had threatened to get her fired after the teacher gave her son a detention. Another was from a neighbor who said Jessica had keyed her car during a dispute about a property line. The third was from a grocery store manager who said Jessica had berated a teenage cashier so badly that the girl quit her job the next day. And the fourth was from a woman at her gym who said Jessica had posted false rumors about her online after an argument over a parking space. Officer Kwan said none of the complaints had resulted in charges because the victims either dropped them or couldn't provide enough evidence. But he said, "Your Honor, there's a clear pattern here." I looked at Jessica, and I could see her getting nervous now. She said, "Those complaints are lies. People are jealous of me and my husband's position." I said, 4 different people in 4 different places all lied about you."
The judge responded firmly, outlining the choices Jessica had made: to strike, to walk away, to mock online, to threaten officials. Then came an unexpected move. Fire Chief Marcus Rivera was summoned. The strategy signaled that this was no longer a private defense. The reputation she had invoked was about to confront reality.
She said, "Yes." I didn't believe her for a second. I asked Officer Kwan, "Is there anything else?" He said, "Yes, Your Honor. When we arrested Ms. Rivera, she told me, and I quote, 'My husband is going to make sure you never work in this city again.' She also said, 'I know people at the courthouse. This judge will throw this out in 5 minutes.' I felt my face get hot. I asked her, 'Did you say that?' She said, 'I was upset. I didn't mean it.' I said, 'You threatened a police officer and you claimed to have influence over me. Is that correct?' She said, 'I was just talking.' I said, 'No, you were trying to use your husband's position to intimidate law enforcement and the judiciary. That's obstruction of justice.' I called for a 15-minute recess because I needed to think. I went back to my chambers and sat down at my desk, and I thought about everything I'd just heard. This wasn't just about a car door hitting someone. This was about a person who believed the rules didn't apply to her, who thought her husband's job gave her the right to treat people however she wanted, and who had spent years getting away with it. I thought about Harold, sitting in that courtroom with his old jacket and his quiet dignity, and I thought about how people like him are the ones who hold our communities together. They serve their country, they work hard, they don't ask for special treatment, and then people like Jessica come along and knock them down, literally and figuratively, and expect no consequences. When I came back into the courtroom, I could see Jessica whispering to her lawyer, and she looked confident again. She thought this was going to go away. I sat down and said, "Ms. Rivera, please stand." She stood up.
Chief Rivera entered unaware of the full scope. As evidence was shown, shock replaced confusion. He admitted she had framed it as misunderstanding. Seeing the posts and hearing of threats, he apologized directly to Harold. In a moment that stunned the room, he removed his wedding ring, distancing himself from conduct he could not defend.
And she had this smirk on her face. That's when she made the biggest mistake of her life. She looked at me and said, "Your Honor, I just want to say that I hope you'll consider my family's contributions to this community before you make your decision. My husband risks his life every day, and I think that should count for something. I also hope you're not one of those judges who lets emotions cloud their judgment." I stopped. I stared at her. I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "I just mean that I've heard you can be a little soft on certain types of people, and I hope you'll be fair to both sides here." She was implying that I would favor Harold because he was a veteran, and she was essentially calling me biased in my own courtroom. Are you still with me? Because what I did next was something I'll never forget, and I think you need to see how this plays out. Stay tuned. I took a deep breath and said, "Ms. Rivera, let me be very clear about something. I've been a judge."
Jessica's composure collapsed. Tears followed, but accountability had arrived. The verdict was delivered, guilty of assault, reckless endangerment, harassment, and obstruction. 90 days in jail, probation, community service at a veterans organization, a $5,000 fine to Harold, mandatory apology, and strict conditions. The courtroom had shifted from privilege to consequence.
For 40 years, and in that time, I've seen every kind of person walk through that door. I've seen people who made mistakes and owned them. I've seen people who were truly sorry and worked to make things right. And I've seen people like you, people who think their money, their connections, and their status put them above the law. You stand here today not because you made a mistake, but because you made a choice. You chose to hurt someone. You chose to walk away. You chose to mock him online. You chose to threaten law enforcement. And now you're choosing to insult me and this court. Her smirk disappeared. I continued, "You asked me to consider your husband's contributions. Let me tell you what I'm considering. I'm considering that your husband dedicated his life to saving people, and you've spent your time hurting them. I'm considering that Harold Thompson served this country in Vietnam while you post memes mocking veterans. I'm considering that he's working at 69 to pay for his daughter's medication while you carry a purse worth thousands of dollars and complain about being inconvenienced." Jessica tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I said, "I'm not finished. You posted his photo online to 50,000 people and called him a liar. You tried to destroy his reputation and his livelihood. And when you were arrested, you threatened a police officer and claimed you could influence this court. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." I looked at Officer Kwan and said, "I want to call Fire Chief Marcus Rivera to the stand." Jessica's face went pale. Her lawyer stood up.
As deputies led Jessica away, Harold stood taller than when he entered. The sentence underscored that repeated behavior, even if previously unpunished, still matters. Outside the courtroom, Chief Rivera later filed for divorce and initiated internal reviews. Justice rippled beyond the defendant, touching family, department, and community alike.
And said, "Your Honor, is that necessary?" I said, "It absolutely is. Bailiff, please contact Chief Rivera and ask him to come to the courthouse immediately." The bailiff made the call, and within 20 minutes, Marcus Rivera walked into my courtroom in his uniform. He looked confused and worried, and I could tell he had no idea what his wife had done. I asked Chief Rivera to approach the bench, and I explained the situation to him. I told him about the assault, the posts, the threats, and the pattern of behavior. I watched his face change from confusion to shock to what looked like deep embarrassment. He said, "Your Honor, I had no idea. I knew she'd been arrested, but she told me it was a misunderstanding. She said the man had walked into her car door and was trying to sue us." I asked him, "Did she tell you she posted about him online?" He said, "No, sir." I asked him, "Did she tell you she threatened Officer Kwan?" He said, "No, sir." I showed him the posts on Officer Kwan's phone, and I watched him read them. His jaw clenched, and he looked over at his wife with an expression I can only describe as betrayal. He said, "Your Honor, I'm so sorry. This is not who I am or what I represent. I'm horrified." I believed him. I could see that this man had built a career on integrity and service, and his wife had just destroyed his reputation in one morning. I asked Chief Rivera, "Did you know your wife has been using your position to threaten and intimidate people?" He said, "I suspected she name-dropped me sometimes, but I didn't know it was this bad. I've told her not to do that." I said, "She told Officer Kwan that you were going to end his career. She told me she has influence in this courthouse. She's been trading on your name for years, and she's been doing it to hurt people." Chief Rivera looked at Harold, who was still sitting quietly in the back, and he said, "Sir, I am deeply sorry for what my wife did to you. You deserved better. Thank you for your service, and thank you for the work you do at the hospital." Harold nodded, and I could see tears in his eyes. Chief Rivera turned back to me.
Weeks later, a letter from Harold's daughter confirmed the broader impact. He kept his job. The community supported them. Dignity had been restored where it was publicly stripped away. The case became a reminder that accountability isn't about revenge. It's about equal rules for everyone, regardless of name or status. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.